This is the second episode in a two-part series, and part of our larger season focused on family advocates and the effects of the MMIP, Missing and Murdered Indigenous People Crisis, in the United States. This episode discusses domestic and intimate partner violence. Listener discretion is advised. This is The Fall Line. Last time, we began the story of Tiffany Reid, who was just 16 years old in the spring of 2004. It was around 8 a.m. when she left her home in the small Navajo Nation town of Shiprock, New Mexico, with plans to walk the short distance to Northwest High School. She'd spoken with her older sister Deandra that morning, and the two had made plans for Tiffany to come over to Deandra's place later on so that she could babysit Deandra's young daughters. It was routine for them. Deandra was working late nights at the Sunray Casino, and Tiffany was willing to help out. She loved to spend time with her nieces. The sisters had had a tough childhood, and it had made them close. As we told you last episode, at 16, Tiffany was establishing her independence. She was developing interests outside her family's sphere. Poetry and music were two of her passions. She brought home stray kittens, and she dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. She'd also made friends that liked to have parties, and she'd stayed out all night a few times. That spring, she'd been tardy to school often enough that her mother, Deidre, had been informed. But Tiffany hadn't gotten into any real trouble. Things had been going okay, just some growing pains, it seemed like, on her way to adulthood. Deandra had no reason to believe that on the morning of May 17th, 2004, her little sister was heading anywhere but Northwest High. Tiffany took everything she'd need for a school day with her. When she did not come home that afternoon, her mother and her sister assumed that she might be out with friends, that maybe she'd decided that she didn't want to babysit, or she'd just forgotten. When dinner time came and then went, their mother Deidre grew worried, and when she called the school, she found out that Tiffany had never made it that morning. But Deandra told us they were not able to report Tiffany as a missing person right away. According to the family, they were told to wait at least 72 hours. In the meantime, they contacted the friends that they knew. Deandra said this was back before cell phones were common in the area, so she had to go door to door with a neighbor, searching out those that she didn't know and following up on rumors. But there was still no sign of her sister. Even after Shiprock Police Department did take the official report, Deandra tells us that her family continued the search on their own. They put up flyers everywhere they could think of, and Deandra went out between shifts at work to search. But there was still no word. Not for weeks. But then, finally, someone called. They hadn't seen Tiffany, but some items had been found near the Arizona border along a dirt road. According to Dateline NBC, that tip likely came in as a result of Deandra's own efforts. Quote, Deandra believes the person who found the belongings put two and two together after seeing the flyers posted around town and Tiffany's story in the local media. Deandra told NBC reporters, quote, they called my mom to let her know, and from there, my mom called the police department. One of those items was Tiffany's library card. That's probably what made the caller decide to report the belongings. Another was a purse with Tiffany's nickname, KC, written on the inside. But there were other things, too, and that's where Deandra and her mother Deidre became confused. According to Deandra, law enforcement responded to the caller's tip. They went out to that rural road and they picked up the items, and then they scheduled time to meet with Deidre. While she recognized that purse and the library card, some of the other things they showed her seemed immediately unfamiliar, specifically some clothing. So Deandra came in, too, to see if she recognized anything else.
You know, my mom is just, she's distraught and all she wants to do is find my sister. And she was like, I can't tell if this is hers or not. And so she called me and I went with her to go identify some of those things. And honestly, I think I think it was her library card that had her name on it and a purse that I had given to her that had her name on it. They say it's a bag, but it's actually a purse. And then there was some clothing that was also found, but none of those clothes were hers. I know that those clothes weren't hers. So we didn't identify those as belonging to her. The way those clothes looked, it wasn't something that she would wear. And I also know that a lot of her clothing that she had that have tags on them, she would write a T on like the tags of her shirts and stuff. And I think that's probably something she picked up from being in the dorm. And these clothes didn't have her initials on there on the tags. I was confused because it's quite a way out from where we live. It was I don't even want to guess how far it was, but I know it's quite a way out. And I was thinking, why would she be out here, you know? But at the same time, like I said, I didn't really know her new bunch of friends. Like I said, a lot of them come from, you know, different areas of the reservation. And so I'm thinking like maybe she's hanging out with somebody who's from that area or you know, I never heard of that party spot. I think just the locals to that area may know that. But as far as I know, I've never been there. I've never seen it. I've never heard of it. So I was a little bit confused as to why her belongings would be way out in that area.
According to Dateline NBC, a now defunct nonprofit volunteered to search the area where the items were found, but they didn't turn up any additional information. To this day, Deandra has no idea who the clothes could have belonged to, or how Tiffany's purse and library card ended up out there, mixed together with other items. It was a lead, but not one that she or her family could follow up on by themselves. Those who found the belongings, they had not seen Tiffany. They just recognized her name from Deandra's own efforts in flyering in the area. Without further investigation or tips, Deandra and her mother didn't know if Tiffany had actually been at the Arizona border herself, or if someone had simply wanted to get rid of her things. Maybe the idea was to suggest that Tiffany had left town, or maybe there was no plan at all, just a need to distance Tiffany's belongings from whoever had them last. That is the trouble with a clue that Deandra can't follow up on. She's left with questions and theories, but no direction to move forward. No one ever came forward to say who might have owned that clothing. And as Deandra tells us, those items cannot be re-examined now for possible forensic evidence.
I think the investigator changed since she went missing 3 or 4 times. And during that time, the belongings of hers that they found alongside the road got lost. So I don't even know what happened to that evidence.
We told you that the evidence found in Tiffany's case was eventually lost, or at least that's what an investigator told Deandra years later. But we need to return to the months after her disappearance. After her library card and purse were found, Tiffany's family kept up their search efforts. They slowly gathered tips from the community, bits and scraps of information, even possible persons of interest. But without any clear trails to follow, it was hard on all of them.
And then eventually I just started working 2 jobs just so I, you know, didn't have to be anywhere except work. And then when I would go home, it would just be to sleep. And during that time, my girls' dad or my girls' auntie would take care of them for me. It was hard. It was really hard and it was really difficult when I would be at work, you know, they'd be doing something like a search or putting up flyers or just driving around looking for her, and I was mad at myself because I had to be at work.
Do you remember hearing anything from the community about anyone being brought in for like questioning?
No, nothing. I feel like they just took the report just to take the report and get us off of their back kind of thing. You know, we've given them a list of names of people that we heard she was with, description of vehicles that she could have possibly have been seen in, and we never got any updates about that. My mom, like I said, she would call and ask, you know, Did you guys look into this? Did they hear anything back about this? What's going on with the information that I gave to you guys? And they're like, oh, we're still looking into it. Just, even to this day, they still say that. It was always my mom calling over there, asking them for updates, asking them for anything, if they got any calls, any information. My mom also got a lot of calls to our landline from tips, people calling in tips. They were calling it to my mom instead of calling the police department. And so my mom would call them and, let them know, hey, I got this tip. And I don't even know if they looked into it or not. From what I understand, all they did was document it into the computer system and nobody ever followed up on it. And every time my mom would call with a tip or to check to see if there's any updates, they were opening a new case every time, a new file for it. So instead of documenting all the tips and all the calls that my mom made under the original missing person report, they were opening a new case for it every time. And so my sister has like 7 different cases or case numbers under her name, which, it makes no sense to me. It made it hard for us to locate the original case number. I spoke with a Shiprock officer. I think this was about the 5th one. He's the last one I spoke to. He met me at the sheriff's department here in Kirtland where I live. And we sat down and he was the one that told me that there's of all these different case numbers. He was the one that got the harsh end of, me going through this with law enforcement, but he was the most helpful. He gave me the information, he gave me all the case numbers. He gave me the names of all the officers that opened up those case numbers. He told me I could get a copy of the report, but when I actually tried to get the copy, they wouldn't give it to me.
Without a uniform case file and all the information gathered in one place, it's doubtful that any officer who tried to review Tiffany's case file could have possibly followed up on all of the tips and leads that her mother Deidre fielded and called in over those years. Her case has been consolidated now, as far as Deandra knows, but that's not all that her family discovered. In 2018, Tiffany's family found out that her information was not in the National Crime Information Center, or NCIC system. According to Dateline NBC, their cousin Becky was working as a community service officer for the Farmington Police Department at the time. Becky told NBC that one evening when she was working, she heard the name Tiffany Reid over the scanner. Quote, "The officers had made a traffic stop, and so I heard the dispatcher running names of the people in the vehicle, and so one of the names caught my ear. I'm like, why is somebody using Tiffany's name? But then she was more concerned when nothing came back when Tiffany's name was run in the system. The person in that car was not Tiffany. That was verified. But the use of her name should have flagged Tiffany as a missing person. Becky attended a community meeting with the Navajo Nation Police to try and find out why, and according to her interview with NBC, Becky spoke with a senior officer and found out that at one point, some of the Navajo Nation's cases had been purged from NCIC. Becky told NBC, quote, "And I go, what do you mean they got purged?" And he's like, well, I guess at one time, all our missing people got purged out of the database, and we thought we entered everybody back in, but Tiffany must not have been re-entered. Deandra told us more about that situation.
They said she got purged from the system. They made a mention of switching over to a new database or something, and that they had to re-enter everybody manually, and Tiffany must have been one that got purged and was never re-entered, which I don't understand because to my knowledge, the police department gets notification that a person is about to be purged from that system or from that database before it even happens. So they have 30 days from that notification to say, okay, we'll keep this person in, or no, we can take this person out. I don't understand that part. Like, you guys are saying she got purged, but it was your responsibility to keep her in that database system, and you failed, to keep her there. It took about 3 years. I think it was like 17 years that had gone by before we were even able to get her re-entered.
According to Dateline NBC, Deandra's cousin Becky, quote, said she never got a clear answer as to why Tiffany or any other missing people would have been purged from the system. And their reporters did not get a response when they asked the Navajo Nation Police Department, Shiprock District Record Section, and the Criminal Investigations Unit, quote, about people being purged from the system. Becky became part of the New Mexico Missing and Murdered Task Force and told NBC, quote, the only way I got help was by being on a task force and pushing and talking to a lot of people. One of the people that Becky spoke with was a U.S. Marshal who, she says, helped get Tiffany back in the system. But, as Deandra said, it took years. And when they found out in 2018 about the NCIC purge, she told us that her mother, Deidre, was already sick. When Tiffany disappeared, Deidre was in remission from breast cancer. When her cancer returned, she kept up the search for Tiffany for as long as she could. When Deidre passed away in 2019, it was without knowing what had happened to her daughter. Deandra then took over, and she's been determined to do everything she can for her sister's case. But she says that hasn't been easy. As we told you last episode, there are two investigative arms in the Navajo Nation, the police and the Criminal Investigations Department. And Deandra has been in contact with both.
And to my understanding, her case is with criminal investigator. I really don't know who I have to turn to, like even to this day, to get accurate information regarding my sister's case. And it's really frustrating to me, and it pisses me off, but in a way that pushes me to prevent this from happening to somebody else,
That drive became a focus for Deandra. Her childhood and her young adulthood played a part too. Everything she'd gone through made her want to seek out a path that could help others in the community.
It was just really hard on me, and the circumstances that we grew up around with the domestic violence and my own intimate partner violence relationship, it was really bad. And I think when I finally broke free from that relationship, I turned to substances. Alcohol was my choice of substance, and I just got lost in it. And that was a way for me to mask up a lot of my hurt and my trauma and everything that I went through. And so I did that for a good while. About 7 years, I think. I got lost in the bottle, and then I got in trouble for it. So that was a little bit of a wake-up call for me, and I had to go to treatment, and that forced me to deal with a lot of the parts of me that were still unhealed. I had to face a lot of that while I was in treatment, and it kind of opened up my eyes a little more, and it helped me to, I guess, understand a little more of why my mom left us like she did, why I turned to drinking, and it's just like a whole new discovery of myself again, like rediscovering myself. I wasn't able to have like a normal childhood. I became a young mom, so I didn't get any of that, teenage normalcy. And so I kind of acted it out while I was stuck in my addiction. And so when I finally got clean and I got sober, um, I met someone and we had 2 kids. And then after that, I was like, okay, my oldest daughter is about to graduate from high school. I was working retail. And so I told my daughter, you're about to graduate from high school. And I told her I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I'm going to go back to school when you go to college. I told her, we'll go to college together. I'll go back when you go. I ended up enrolling within the community college that same semester as she did, but she was in a different college. And then during this time, my mom was just, her health was really declining. And right when I started my first semester back into college is when my mom passed. And I just feel like it was meant to be that way. I think school really saved me from falling back into that bottle, from the grief of losing my mom. And, the school offered free counseling. So I took advantage of that during that time. And I think school just really kept me busy, kept my mind busy. So I didn't think too much about my mom during that time. And then I graduated and I really went back to school to be a juvenile probation officer. Like I said, when I was growing up, I was a troubled teen too. I got into trouble and I ended up having to be on juvenile probation. And my probation officer at that time was really discouraging. She, would put us down and talk bad to us, and there wasn't any type of like encouragement or anything of that sort with her. And so I always thought back to that, like if she would have just talked to me right and tried to mentor me or try to steer me in the right direction, giving me options and stuff, I think I would have turned out a better kid. So I thought, well, I'm going to go back to school to do that so I can be the opposite of what my juvenile probation officer was to me. And so I did an internship with the juvenile justice system here in Farmington at the Juvenile Detention Center. And it was different, back then they didn't have kid jail for us. So there was nowhere for them to take us when we would get in trouble except home. So now they have that jail here, and I was just like, oh, I don't want to be on this side of it. So then I went back to school with the university to get my bachelor's degree, and then I applied for an internship. It was a developing future victim specialist program, and that's where I was introduced to the whole different world, and I was introduced to advocacy. And I was just like, wow, like this is something I could see myself doing. And I attended a webinar one day and they were talking about my sister on that webinar. And I was like, whoa, like what the heck? And it broke my heart to have to see her face like that. But at the same time, it gave me a whole new inspiration as to what I could do to help her and to help the other families who are missing a loved one. That's how I got introduced to the coalition.
When Deandra mentions the coalition, she's speaking about the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women, a nonprofit that, per their official website, was, quote, organized in 1995 by 3 founding Native women to provide support to other Native advocates working in domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, stalking, and sex trafficking in New Mexico's tribal communities. Their single goal, to eliminate violence against Native women and children. Today, the coalition is, quote, a resource for training, advocate support, technical assistance, and policy advocacy. CSVANW has also aided in supportive collaborations with tribal leadership to further develop and promote tribal, federal, state, and local legislation and policies that cultivate best practices for responding to violent crime against Native women and children. The coalition organizes and participates in events like trainings and collaborations throughout the year, from trainings on topics like the dynamics of trafficking in tribal communities to legislative advocacy workshops.
I stay pretty active with them as far as like the advocate trainings and just all the different things that they provide. And so that's how I became, really good friends with a lot of the people within the coalition. I started to rethink like, I don't know if I want to be a probation officer anymore. And so that's when I applied with the coalition. I was like, well, it's worth a shot. I don't have a lot of like the credential stuff that they're asking for, but I do have all of that lived experience, you know? So I went through with it, and here I am. I got the position, and it's just been a whole different world for me. The position that I have, it's called the Land and Body Violence Coordinator. And it gives me the opportunity and the chance to be out in the community with the impacted families of MMIP. So after starting in this position is when I was really able to get out there and do advocacy and help other families do advocacy, and just to be with the other families who are impacted by violence, and just to help them and guide them, and share resources with them, and the families who are just now experiencing, a missing loved one, just kind of giving them guidance and help, and giving them the resources that we know are available to them. Now that we're coming into a new year, some of the things that I'll be doing is community gatherings, which, is specifically targeting MMIP families and advocates and people who work with, the families. So I think one of the big things that I'm going to do for this is going to be like a media outreach, like talking points for, the families that have not spoke to media yet. Because I know once you start talking to somebody, sometimes you begin to ramble. And so just like giving them the main points to humanize their loved one, just so that the media can see them, or the people that will be reading or watching your interview could see your loved one as a person. Another thing that I want to do is I really want to expand our reach. So our home office is in Albuquerque, which is the biggest, the major city in New Mexico. And since I work from home, I'm close to Farmington. So I've been bringing some of those gatherings here to Farmington. But now I want to go even further beyond that, and I want to take it to Gallup, because Gallup is also a border town like Farmington is. And so I think if I can bring it to Gallup and get the people from that part of the reservation out to know that we're here, that we exist, that we're trying to help, we're trying to expand our reach. It's just some of the things that I want to do. And then I have like a healing retreat that I do for the families, because advocating and doing interviews and speaking with media and doing the footwork and the searches and all those things, it takes a toll on you physically, mentally, emotionally. And so this retreat is just to give them that time to take for themselves, to like take a step back and to breathe and to just take in, everything that's around you, and just be in that moment instead of having your mind here and your body there, and just being all the places, being everywhere else except within yourself. I think as an impacted family member, one of the biggest things is we worry about everybody else. We're worried about this family. We're worried about that family. We have another loved one that is missing over here. What's going on with that? And so we're always out there trying to help each other and trying to help these other families that are just now experiencing this, that we forget what self-care is. We forget what wellness looks like for us, because that's the drive that keeps us going, is being out there and being proactive and spreading the word and the knowledge and the crisis. So the healing retreat is just to kind of bring us back and recenter us and give us that sense of purpose again, and just to kind of just to take a load off for one day, and just to refuel us and to remind us of why we're doing this work. And then I also do MMIWR advocacy training. So for everybody who works in that capacity, we do a 1-day, 2-day training this year for search and rescue basics, self-care, networking, and just getting, people who work in this capacity in one room together so that we can collaborate and share ideas of what we can do, how we're going to do it, why we should do it, and, just all the things to just like one big brainstorm and of how to get the word out there, how to bring this awareness to a farther reach. And one new training that I have is for law enforcement and first responders specifically, which I'm really excited about. I think, this will be a really good training for law enforcement because a lot of them are not trauma informed. They say they get the training, but that's just when they come onto the force. It's just the one thing. I think trauma informed care training should be year round, at least, once or twice every year.
And it should be provided by a person who has experienced the trauma.
Yeah. And I'm really looking forward to this one because it's a new training we're going to be doing. And so I'm hoping to have this in August, right before my grant ends, so that it gives me enough time from now until then to start building those connections and the relationships within the law enforcement to make this a successful training. So I really enjoy what I do. To me, it doesn't feel like work because, a majority of the things I was already doing before I became an actual employee of the coalition. And so now to be able to do it and it not feeling like a job, it's just really rewarding to me.
Deandra has been an advocate for a long time now, for her sister, and now for families across New Mexico. Seeing proof of the difference that she's made is something that keeps her going, especially since Tiffany's case has been so difficult to pursue. Her own children tell her that they see it, the good that their mother's doing, and how she's changed and grown in the process too.
My oldest daughter, she's really good about encouraging me. They were there to see me go through all the bull that I went through and then to come back from that and to be where I'm at right now. She tells me all the time like she's proud of me, which is kind of weird because, that's usually the parent telling their child like, "Hey, I'm proud of you." But she's really good. I think she sees it in me when I feel defeated sometimes. And so she's really good at encouraging me like, "You did all this," and like she always tells me, "Just remember before, whenever you would Google Tiffany's name, there wasn't really anything there. But if you Google her now," she was like, "you've done so many interviews, you've done so many podcasts, and you spoke to so many different people, and there's all kinds of things that come up when you Google her name." She said, "I think she would be really proud of you too."
Watching her daughters grow up and explore their independence, Deandra can't help but think about Tiffany.
She was just discovering herself as a person, as an individual, as Tiffany when she went missing. And it's just really sad that, I never got to see her as an adult and the things that she would have accomplished. And she was a writer. She liked writing music and poetry. She used to sing a lot and, her voice was really pretty. And I always just wonder, like, what she would sound like now. And I was robbed of that. And I'm still mad about it. And I'm always going to be mad about it until I get the answers that I need and the closure that I need. And even then, I'm not going to stop doing what I'm doing. I don't know if her case is making any progress. I do know that since I started heavily advocating for her, that Shiprock Police Department has been questioned a lot especially by media. My intention is not to make them look bad. My intention is for them to be accountable of the mistakes that they made and to make sure that they don't make those same mistakes again. That's what I want. And that's what my goal is. And for me to share their failures in my sister's case, I think that helps remind them, like, this is where we messed up. This is what happened. I wish that they had a specific task force within the Navajo Nation to come up with these, procedures and these policies for MMIP and to train every single officer in this specific area. continuously, not just once, but ongoing, so that that mistake doesn't happen to somebody else in the future.
In December of 2024, the FBI released a list of more than 200, quote, Native Americans verified as missing throughout New Mexico and the Navajo Nation. Tiffany Reid is on that list. So are Melissa Montoya and Calvin Martinez, who have both been featured on the Fall Line. There are so many other faces we recognize, posters that we've shared on social media or seen mentioned in news stories, where families gather and demand answers. However, the true count of missing and murdered, it's unknown. Nearly all involved governmental agencies, they acknowledge that. And the loved ones of the victims have had to become grassroots organizers, fighting an ongoing crisis. Certainly, some official changes have come. Savannah's Act, which was signed into law in 2020, is probably the most famous example. And groups like the CSVANW, they're working overtime to help as many people as they can, but without much more support at every single level. Organized, funded, legislated support with communication at the core. The work falls back on families and small nonprofits and advocates who are afraid to stop, even for a moment, even to care for themselves. Because if they don't do it, who will? Who will find out that a police report was lost or a case was closed? Who will go knocking on doors or paint signs? It's a cycle that never ends. That's why Deandra is organizing a retreat this year to offer a little reprieve, and that's a mission that you can donate to. If you'd like to help, you can join us in supporting her event via the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women's website, where donations can be made. There's a link in our show notes, so please take a moment to share that if you can't help out personally right now. Tiffany Reid has been missing since 2004. She would be 37 years old today. At the time of her disappearance, she was 5'3" and 115 pounds, and is described as a Native American female with black hair and brown eyes. Tiffany has a cigarette burn scar on the inner side of her upper arm and a scar under her right eye. If you have any information regarding Tiffany's disappearance, please contact the Navajo Police Department tip line at 928-686-8563 or email tips.npd@navajo-nsn.gov. Next time on the Fall Line, we return to Farmington, New Mexico to cover the unsolved double homicide of two men, Kendrick Begay and Anthony McCants, who were murdered while at work in October of 2023. If you know of a case that should be covered on the Fall Line, there's a link to our case submission form in the show notes. Thank you for listening. The Fall Line is an independent podcast, and we appreciate listener support. It allows us to do research, obtain FOIA, pay our content advisors, and support and donate to the causes we care about. If you try out the products we advertise, please use our sponsor codes. It really helps. And please take a moment to rate and review our show in your podcast app of choice. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please be sure to check your subscription to make sure you're set for automatic downloads so that you don't miss an episode. My book, Lay Them to Rest, which covers years of my life working on a Jane Doe case, is out everywhere now. It's a hardcover, ebook, and audiobook. You can order it anywhere you get your books and through your local library. Find out more in the link in our show notes. And if you'd like to support the show and the stories we cover, join us on Patreon or Apple Premium. 100% of our Patreon and Apple Premium earnings are supporting our Family Therapy Fund and actively paying for therapy for families who appeared on the show. On Patreon, you can get early release, ad-free versions of our regular episodes for $5 a month. If you prefer Apple Premium, you can subscribe there as well. On Patreon, we also post occasional giveaways, updates, and blogs, which all patrons can enjoy, starting at just $1. The Fall Line is written, hosted, and researched by Laurah Norton, with additional research assistance by Melissa Gold, interviews by Brooke Hargrove, produced, engineered, and scored by Maura Curry, content advisement by Vic Kennedy and Brandy C. Williams. Special thanks to Liz Lipka.